But Europe also holds cards, and Ukraine holds cards. I mean, even if America stopped, Ukraine could keep fighting for months and months and months, and then with European help, which is continuing, I mean, it's not about to collapse.
We're hearing that new US-Ukraine talks are going to be held in Saudi Arabia next week. President Zelensky says he has hopes it will be a meaningful meeting. The US say they want to discuss a framework for peace to try and end the war. Relations, as you well know, are extremely strained. We're less than a week on from that very combative clash in the White House when Zelensky was ordered out of the White House. Since then, the US, the biggest supplier of military aid to Ukraine, froze aid and stopped sharing intelligence. And Europe are definitely feeling the need to step up and support where the US seems to be withdrawing. 20 countries have now signalled they'd support the British and French-led coalition of the willing to try and protect Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. Well, Steven Erlanger is the New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent who is here. Steven, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, we've been hearing in this meeting of defence secretaries yesterday between the UK and US defence secretaries that Donald Trump says he's encouraged by Ukraine's commitment to peace. How much can we actually read into that statement?
It's very hard to know, to be honest. It's been, as you say, a very difficult, almost humiliating period of time. Trump clearly wants a deal done. He clearly thinks Ukraine's in the way. He's twisting arms. He says he's twisting Russian arms. We haven't seen that very much yet. Zelensky has had to eat crow, as we say, and encouraged by European leaders like Keir Starmer, he's been encouraged to come back and try to make things good with the United States once again.
Yeah. We hear about these new talks next week, US-Ukraine talks to be held in Saudi Arabia. What hopes are there of the best outcome from that meeting?
Well, we still have the essential problem, which is that Donald Trump thinks he should get a ceasefire right away to stop the killing. And he trusts Vladimir Putin to respect that ceasefire. And then have talks, while Zelensky and the Europeans don't really trust Vladimir Putin and want some sort of guarantees or assurances on the ground before the ceasefire, any ceasefire begins. And Zelensky is afraid that a ceasefire would simply let Russia build up its troops and it could end at any time. So that's one of the big things that they obviously need to settle. And the other big thing is, you know, the Europeans go running around talking as if there's going to be some sort of European monitoring force, peacekeeping force, tripwire force. We don't really know on the ground in Ukraine. So far, the Russians have said, Nilzya, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. So there's a lot, you know, of basic stuff to resolve before the war ends.
That idea that Putin has said there will be no sort of European troops, it feels like a bit of an impasse that doesn't have a block around it. And how futile do you think the conversations that Europe are having right now? We've had this 800 billion euro announcement of a rearmament fund, this sort of coalition of the willing. How useful is that if President Putin just absolutely won't budge there?
Well, I think it is useful because it's very important that Ukraine understand it has friends in the world, and the real issue right now is keeping going aid to Ukraine, particularly military aid, in case the Americans stop, even intelligence aid. So Europe's commitment is really important. Also, to be honest, the Russians have a bargaining position too. We'll see what, in the end, comes out of what has to be a negotiation. So I don't think it's useless. I do think this 800 billion euro number is a bit fanciful. I mean, the main thing the European Union is doing is promising $150 billion in loan possibilities for military investments. That's more for European military industry to do more production, which is necessary anyway. That's real. The other 600 million is basically the European Union saying, just two countries, well, we'll relax our rules on debt limitations if you're spending extra money on the military. That doesn't mean they have to. And some of these countries, like France, for instance, even Britain, which isn't part of the EU, but still have, big debt problems already. So how much more debt they want to add on, even if they're allowed to, is an open question.
Yeah, particularly because Europe are debating if the US's pause on military aid becomes more permanent, how much can they step up? I mean, what we heard yesterday, Pete Hegseth said that that was not a permanent move, but a pause pending a true commitment to a path to peace. What do you think he means? I mean, obviously, President Zelensky wants peace. What do you think he means when he describes it as a true, needing to see demonstration of a true commitment to a path to peace?
Well, this is Trump leverage. I mean, Trump pushing Zelensky into doing a kind of deal Trump would think needs to be done by putting huge pressure on him by limiting or stopping American aid. I mean, that's very good leverage, and that's the way Trump works. So the whole point of it, as Hegseth says, is to get Zelensky into talks with Russia, but on terms that Zelensky doesn't necessarily like, which is what led to the blowup in the Oval Office.
Yeah, when Donald Trump kept saying, look, you don't hold the cards, I hold the cards, and that kind of is true, isn't it?
Well, it is true to some degree, but Europe also holds cards, and Ukraine holds cards. I mean, even if America stopped, Ukraine could keep fighting for months and months and months, and then with European help, which is continuing, I mean, it's not about to collapse. I mean, the front line isn't moving very, very far. But in the long run, of course, the American help is really crucial. No one believed there'd be a huge American tranche of money coming after the Joe Biden 61 billion. So it is really partly a question of the arms that have already been paid for under that 61 billion continuing to be shipped to Ukraine. At the moment, Trump has stopped that. And also the U.S. intelligence sharing, which really does matter for Ukrainian targeting and so on. So the U.S. has a lot of leverage, but Ukraine has agency in all of this, and so does Europe.
And I guess we would hope that maybe some lessons have been learnt based on what happened last weekend from Zelensky's perspective in terms of how to best get what you want out of President Trump.
Yes, I hope so. I mean, one thing he should try to avoid is getting into a public dispute with Donald Trump, because it's not very useful for anyone. Some people suggest the Oval Office thing was a trap. It's hard to know. I mean, certainly J.D. Vance pushed lots of buttons, but one would have hoped at least that at some point these kinds of debates took place behind closed doors and not in public, because in public they do no one any good, and offending Donald Trump, as we know, and he's very easily offended, tends to produce petulant responses.
Donald Trump is easily offended. He does also seem at times, if people do apologise, quite quick to move on. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, Trump does like people to bend the knee, and he particularly likes strong people to bend the knee, and then he gets to feel big and feels that he's the decider. So yeah, I mean, I think he accepts apologies, and he has a degree of contempt for weakness, that's for sure. But you have to find the balance between pushing back and appearing weak. That's the hard part.
He's definitely looking strong when it comes to the, I guess, threats also that have been given to American allies when it comes to their defence spending. US officials said Trump may refuse to defend allied countries that don't spend enough on defence. There is this backdrop of what happens next for NATO. What's your sort of view 5 years from now or 4 years from now, when Donald Trump has had his time in office, of what NATO might look like then?
Well, it's hard to know. It's hard to go back. I do think Trump I mean, Trump has talked this way in the past, right? This is not a new thing of his. I mean, he does believe somehow in his head, he's always believed it, that NATO is some kind of racketeering club where people owe money to the United States. He believes NATO allies take advantage of the United States. He doesn't quite seem to understand the history of NATO, which was constructed by the United States and run by the United States and commanded by the United States. So its European allies, one, would be protected, but two, would basically do what the US wanted them to do. So it's in the interests, most presidents have felt, for the US to be deeply engaged inside NATO. So Trump, I think his pressure on Europe to do what it should do, and American presidents since Harry Truman have said Europe should do more for its own defense, spend more, do more. Russia's next door. If Europe doesn't feel the need to do more, no one can help them. So that part makes a great deal of sense, and Europe is responding to those kinds of threats. The big question is if the U.S., as Hegseth has said, wants to prioritize Asia, which it clearly does, it may gradually pull out of troops out of NATO and different capabilities. And the Europeans could make up for this, but I'm doing a story now about what it would take. It would take a lot of money, but money is less of an issue. It takes ordering stuff that takes a long time to come. It's strategic enablers. It's personnel. Europe doesn't have enough people in an organized fashion. And it's about command and control. So if it's done gradually, I can see NATO being still strong 4 years from now, but with a much stronger European leadership element and more European obligations for its own conventional defense.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for your time in what has just been an extraordinary fortnight. Steven Erlanger, New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent. Thank you.